Hello and welcome to episode 38 of the Women in Manufacturing Association's Hear Her Story podcast. My name is Allison Graylis, president and founder of the Women in Manufacturing Association. In this episode, I have the great pleasure of talking with Katherine Goldstein, a journalist, speaker, and champion for mothers and caregivers in the workplace. Katherine's work has been published in news outlets such as Time and the New York Times, and she's also been featured in major media outlets, including Good Morning America, NPR, and the Washington Post. Katherine will be the opening keynote speaker at our upcoming virtual Moms in Manufacturing conference on June 13th. So we encourage you to join us again on the 13th to hear more from Katherine and to dive deeper into how we can best support mothers and caregivers in manufacturing. Welcome, Katherine.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you be a part of our Hear Her Story podcast. And as you've probably learned, as maybe you listened into some of our past episodes, we really love this platform because it allows us the opportunity to showcase stories of women leaders, women in the workplace, and then as well to be very honest and authentic about some of the challenges that they may experience as they're engaging in their career trajectory, but as well to provide guidance and insights and solutions for people as they are navigating their career. And as I've looked through your kind of career trajectory, you have a really neat background. And I love that you started your career as what I think you deemed yourself a corporate feminist. And
Yes.
you held major and multiple leadership positions at large media companies in your 20s. And then at 32, you became a new mom without a job. And so, I think as many of us moms experience, we have different transitions and periods of our career and obviously our personal life as well. So I thought maybe you could give us a little bit about your background and then as well, maybe walk us through that career transition that you experienced during that time in which you were becoming a mom.
Yes. So I was a very go-getter New York media professional. As you say, I was an all-in on lean-in corporate feminist. I really believed that there was nothing that was going to hold me back in the workplace. If as long as I, put my best foot forward and tried hard, the sky was the limit. And that was also the way I think I was raised as a child. So I had a lot of professional success in my 20s and early 30s. And it's very cliche to say, having a child changes everything. I mean, we've heard that a million times before, but for me, it definitely really changed the trajectory of my life. So my son Asher was born with some health problems. He's doing great now, but it was, a very difficult time. He was hospitalized a few times when he was a newborn. And, I was still back at work at 12 weeks when my maternity leave was up. And I then got fired from my job when he was 6 months old. And it was a traumatic experience because my whole identity was wrapped up in being a good professional. And I felt like I'd always done everything right. And felt like I was a failure as a working mother. Everyone must have this working mom thing figured out except for me. And I was a personal failure. And so I really sort of had to sit with that. And then, sort of, as more time passed, I kind of started to turn my journalistic eye towards the things that make life so difficult for working mothers. And instead of thinking I was a personal failure, I started to look at some of the social and economic forces that make it so difficult to be a mother in the workplace and an employed mother. And that's sort of how my career trajectory changed. And I started focusing on social and economic issues facing mothers. I now look much more broadly at caregivers in general, public policy, all this. But that was sort of my personal experience definitely inspired the next 8 to 9 years of my career.
And I think you very wisely stated, it might sound a bit trite to say that everything changes when you have a child, but it really does. Not only, that the physicality of birthing a child and then having a whole new person to care for, but I don't think anyone can prepare you 100% for how dramatically your life changes and is impacted by then having a little one to care for. And as well, our Moms Initiative actually started because of a personal reflection piece I wrote in our weekly newsletter as I reflected during pandemic at the time my kids were an eighth grader and seventh grader, what a difficult journey it had been to rise in a career at the same time of having children because there's so many trade-offs and so many concessions you make. And for me, pandemic was a blessing because I got to be home at some of the most pivotal times in my kids' lives when not traveling and not commuting to an office a half hour each way, and just being there to be for this even small period of time when they would get off the bus at school from school. And it's a difficult journey emotionally. It's a difficult journey with us making really tough career decisions, and as well trying to integrate all of this because I don't believe balance is a real thing. Integrating that those professional demands with your personal demands, and it's really challenging. And I had a similar upbringing to you. My mom kind of raised me that I could do anything, I can be anything, and it's really tough though when you come to that crossroads when you're like, wow, why am I struggling with not being, how can I be both a really super amazing mom and also a super amazing professional? Those two things are really hard to blend. It's
Yeah.
tricky.
Yes. I mean, I think so. Generationally, I'm an elder millennial. And I think that a lot of people in my age cohort were sort of raised with the idea, this sort of feminist message of you can be anything. When you say it, you're like, that sounds great. Of course, we should definitely encourage girls to feel that way. But I think that in some ways it puts the onus on the individual that they can be anything and not ever looking at what are forces larger than the individual that make it difficult to be anything. And it's not, it makes it very like, well, if you aren't everything you've ever dreamed of, it's your fault. I now have 3 sons, so I think about feminism from the perspective of raising boys, but I think thinking about those messages for girls and how we give them now through our own experiences should be a bit more nuanced.
Exactly. And being more honest. I'm a generation before you. And I think that was one of my generational hangovers that we've had, is that we thought we truly could be everything and that we were failures if we were struggling. And I think that's why you see now, and I'm thrilled to see a greater awareness and importance placed on self-care and therapy and support. And it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah,
I found that in my own career, I didn't want to ask for help
right.
because that was saying I couldn't do it all. Like I was going to kill myself and be up at 2 a.m. baking, cupcakes for the fundraiser the next day because I had to be that great super mom and super class parent and as well be a really uber busy professional. And I think it's great that many positive outcomes have come from pandemic about just recognizing the whole person that comes to work that's professionally in the workplace. Because I think many of us struggled with, gosh, I just really, why am I not being able to do this? Maybe everybody can but me. And so I think sharing stories like we will at the moms conference and as we do on this podcast to be realistic about things, we hope sets the stage for women to really understand that we're not all superpowered people, that we all struggle in different ways and that there are hacks to help and people to help as we do navigate these careers. So it's important stuff. So you went through this major career transition at the same time that you're raising kids, having kids. And how did that lead to what you then birthed in terms of kind of a new focus professionally?
Yeah, so I just became really interested in the social forces that shape family life and motherhood. And at the time, this is funny because so my son is almost 9. And when I say like back then, I make it sound like it was in 1842, but even a decade ago, a lot of issues around motherhood were seen as lifestyle, fluffy, just 5 lunch packing strategies, and what's the best swaddle. And all those things are still around and they can still be helpful. But there wasn't a lot of discussion about the childcare crisis. There wasn't a lot of discussion about sort of the economic cost of raising families and the motherhood penalty at work, stuff like that. So I'm very happy that I've been able to be part of that conversation because I think that it's a big deal that childcare issues are on the front page of the business section. That is new. For those
Right.
people who are new moms or new to these issues, that was not how the world was 10 years ago. And everything was seen as a personal problem with personal solutions. And there's a lot more awareness of these like social and political and public policy issues. And so really enjoyed being part of that conversation I did a podcast for a number of years. I now do a newsletter about the forces that shape family life in America and challenging the status quo of work and care and writing for outlets. And I work at a think tank. I have a lot of jobs, as you can tell, but sort of continuing to advance those conversations. And I think a big shift really has been, and I'm always and forever going to champion and want to talk about realities for moms, but I actually think it benefits moms to talk about caregivers as a whole because not everyone is a mom and not everyone currently has young children, but almost everyone is going to be a caregiver at some point in their life, and everyone has received or will receive care. And so that's a way to bring more people into these realities. And maybe someone doesn't have a new baby, but they're caring for an elderly parent, or they have a sibling that is disabled that they are going to be taking care of for a long time. And these realities are really important, and they can bring us together about what needs to change and how to support each other rather than just saying, well, this is my issue and this is what I need. So I'm really glad that some of those discussions are really shifting.
I really like that point that you bring up because we often talk as a female-based organization that, for example, childcare and flexibility are not women's issues, they're general human issues. And I think
Yes.
the same should be discussed as we talk about that big topic of childcare. It's not just a female issue, and it should be put into this larger category, as you're saying. I think it's really smart to frame it as caregiver issues, caregiver conversations we're having, because we all, as you said, are going to care for an aging parent or a child that may need us in a certain circumstance or a relative that may need support or help. So I think it's that those care conversations are really big, and to broaden them well beyond childcare is really smart because almost all of us will be impacted by some level of care, either that we receive or give in the future. So,
Yes.
we talk about childcare issues, and it is exciting to see that it's finally receiving, or they are receiving, the attention that they need to by legislators, by decision makers, by companies to again recognize that that's a major nuance that their employees experience. So, as a journalist, what are some of these major trends that you're seeing, specifically as we talk about kind of parents and caregivers? What do you see as trends over these past few years as you've been heavily covering it and researching it? And are there any things that you're finding to be surprising, concerning, or promising in this space?
Oh yes. Well, I could talk about all those things for about an hour and a half. So I will pick some of my favorites. So I did a big report last year for a think tank called Better Life Lab at New America about sort of a playbook for the care movement and thinking about how we can advance care in America. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is, for those who follow politics, like, you may know that we were very close to having a huge billions of dollars in federal investment into childcare infrastructure through Build Back Better. That failed to pass by one vote in the Senate. So it was very close. And that would have transformed our care system dramatically. And so it's very easy to say, like, oh, that didn't happen, so that there's nothing we can do. And I've actually found a lot of really promising, interesting things happening at state and local levels to get people aware of these issues, to fund issues. And for example, there's a number of states and cities and counties that have put care funding on ballot initiatives. And when you put care issues like childcare funding in front of voters, it's actually very popular and across political lines. And a lot of times when these issues come up for renewal, they actually get more votes than they got the first time. People are willing to even vote to raise their own taxes to pay for care. So there's a big disconnect between sort of like what it can feel like in action on the federal level and like what people want in their daily lives. And they're like, yes, I want more childcare. Yes, we want more subsidies. Yes, we want our workers to be paid well. Yes, we don't want the industry to collapse. So to me, there's been some really cool examples. Multnomah County in Portland, Oregon has passed a universal pre-K initiative that is being funded with a property tax. In New Mexico, they have a unique funding mechanism, and they've put access to pre-K into their constitution of the state, which is really interesting. So to me, these are all building momentum for what I think is sort of the universal policies we need and deserve at the federal level. But just because you feel like things are not happening fast enough, or you are new to the issue and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how expensive this is, there are probably people in your area who are working on this and working on it at the local level. And it's really worth sort of tapping into what is happening and what's possible, because it's not an overnight thing. All these successful initiatives usually took about 10 years. So we sort of have to think about it not just from a personal perspective, but from a community and political perspective.
So you talk about that community awareness. Where might you drive people? So if I'm a caregiver in a given state or city, is there a repository of information, or where best can people find some of that information about how they help, how they support maybe current driving initiatives?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I wish that there was like one website I could just be like childcareactivism.org. Maybe
Right.
someone should make that. I should, but there are definitely, I think every state and city, as far as I know, does have some of these organizations. I mean, I feel like one good place to look that does have chapters everywhere is in Moms Rising, and they work on childcare issues. So they might at least be able to direct you to specifically around childcare stuff. And some of it is really growing. Some areas are actually unionizing childcare workers, and so that's interesting to look into as well. And also the National Domestic Workers Alliance is another area that does work in many, many states. So they're worth looking into as well. So those would be the top line resources, I would say.
Right. So Mom Rising and a few others that people can check out to see again if
Yes.
they want to be more active and supporting a cause or initiative in their more localized region, they can look
Yeah.
there. So we briefly mentioned pandemic, and I shared just some personal experiences that for me, it was a great reset for how I was integrating some parts of my life. And also, again, a blessing because I got to not travel for a little bit, be part of my kids, some major milestone parts of their educational careers, which was really great. I know during pandemic, you happened to have twins, and I'm sure that greatly impacted your personal life. So many people we know who were at home trying to balance work and child issues and education really struggled. So as you, I'm sure, reflected and have done research and you yourself experienced this, can you share with us how pandemic, how you saw or have done research around how it impacted obviously women in the workplace, and then as well, how did it impact your personal life?
Yes. So my personal life took another dramatic twist so my twins were born on February 12th, 2020. So you can kind of imagine what happens next. And there's really no sugarcoating that it was like a really incredibly difficult time. I remember like at the time people were like, we're enjoying our time as a family and we're baking bread and we've got this amazing garden going. And I'm just like, my life is chaos. No one is baking bread. My older child has become a feral monster with his iPad. They're screaming children all the time. Like it was not, there was no, there was no like idyllic silver lining. So for anyone who is listening who is in the same boat as me, know that not everyone was having some sort of magical bread baking extravaganza in the early days of lockdown. So yeah, I mean, I think what living through that experience did for me, I think it really highlighted to me some big social failures because it felt like families were really on their own, especially with schools being closed. My older son's school was closed for a year. And to me, like looking back on that, I find that to be an unacceptable social failure. If bars are open and schools are closed, that's an unacceptable social priority, in my opinion. Yeah, I think that it really highlighted to me how much we need to have and build up our personal communities because I'm personally a big believer that there's certain problems that only large amounts of money from the government can solve. But there are other problems that, as I interviewed someone, an author named Mia Birdsong, and she's like, the government's not going to come check on you and bring you soup if you're sick, like there's a lot of reasons that we need to reinvest in our personal communities. And I think people don't know how to do that. And so that's sort of one area that I'm actually exploring. I'm working on in my sort of next phase of some of my career work is thinking about those community issues because I think that that's a big missing piece. And I think we did see some coming together and mutual aid and people getting to know their neighbors and maybe forming little pods for school and stuff like that. And I think that's really great. And I think we need to learn how to do more of that and champion that more and understand that in order to have a healthy society and a happy life, we need that in our lives.
Yeah, communities are critical. I think, as you said, pandemic illuminated that importance of having people you can lean on, people that you can connect with, people that can help, especially as you're home with two newborns
Yes.
and a child not going to school. Those are some pretty traumatic topics, I can
Yeah.
imagine. And so it's tough if you don't have those people to help. And I think that segues nicely into our conference, why we started our moms conference was obviously Moms in Manufacturing. It is intended for moms and caregivers. We've always held it virtually purposely for inclusivity purposes. We know travel can be tough, especially on caregivers. So we've always done it and delivered it as a one-day virtual conference. So this year it's on June 13th, as I mentioned. And you say, I think it segues nicely into the community, and this conference was started because of highlighting that importance of having a group of people that you can go to for advice and support and resources. So you spoke on it a little bit, but specifically as we look at an audience of mothers and caregivers, are any other reasons why that community fostering is so very important?
Yeah, I think that finding that community can be so essential in all aspects of our life, but especially in motherhood, because I think American motherhood can be very isolating. As we talked about before, it can be very individualistic. Like, well, it can feel like, well, everybody else is managing this. Like, why am I the only one who forgot to bring cupcakes to the bake sale or whatever? And I think that bringing people together, and also, I think to me, building community is also about vulnerability. Part of building community is asking for help. If you never need anything, you can't really have a give and take. You can't have mutuality. If you're like, I'm good, I'm fine, I never need anything, everything's great, like you can have friends, but you're not going to build a deeper relationship with people. So I feel like bringing people together, having honest conversations, and having a little bit of vulnerability, that can be nuanced and tricky, especially in a workplace. And so sometimes I think what's great about groups like Women in Manufacturing is that people can come together across workplaces. And it's not like, oh, I'm saying this to my closest teammates. You might find someone that's in your industry, but you doesn't work at your company that you can sort of share something with, and that doesn't feel quite as sort of like oversharing in a specific workplace scenario, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to worry that your boss is going to judge you if you tell someone that you've been having daycare breakdowns or whatever, this sort of thing. So I feel like that those kinds of cross sector or cross company professional groups are really powerful for people to have that opportunity to come together.
Yeah, I agree. I think that anonymity piece of it, that you're not necessarily sharing within your own company and organization, but you have this opportunity to kind of vet and
Yes.
to share in a more open setting that's a little safer, perhaps
Yeah.
for individual kind of people participating. So I know you're the creator of the Double Shift newsletter and community, and would love to have you give us some background on the how and why this came to be, and then as well maybe you could share a few of some of your most recent and or favorite topics that you've been discussing in this newsletter.
Yes. So this started as a podcast in 2019 about telling stories about challenging the status quo of motherhood and working motherhood. And I've really expanded it beyond that. And it's now in a newsletter format because I think that's sort of the podcast can be very intensive to make. So there's professional reasons that the newsletter is a better format for me. I mean, one of the things I love about it is unlike writing for a website or a magazine where you have to say, here's what I want to write, and the editor says, oh, I'm not sure about that. Like, how about this? With the newsletter, it's just anything I want to talk about, I get to write about. Also, one of the things I love is having really great discussions within from readers about their opinions and their stories. And that is just having that two-way street is really amazing. And because, like, for example, we have members only threads. And what's great about that is that it's just delightfully free of internet trolls. Like, I've never had to delete a comment. Like, it's just like a blissfully happy place on the internet, which is rare. So that's very nice. But for example, last week we had a really robust thread. I interviewed an author who wrote a recent book about friendship and placing friendship at the center of our world. And we had great conversations about what's your ideal living arrangement with, would you want to live next door to your best friend? Like, would you want to live in co-housing? What kind of neighborhood would you want to live in? Like, what's your dream scenario? And people shared so many things, and it was really interesting. And also to hear how some people had an adult friend without a child who lived with them, and all sorts of interesting arrangements that we don't always hear about. So I love the newsletter format. So I would say one of my subtopics is that I'm very passionate about right now is how broken and messed up summer camp in America is. Because
And I'm sure you're experiencing it live, right?
yes, I really live my art. So just like how expensive it is, how competitive it is to get even a slot, why we have this system of privatized care in the summer, sort of the various inequalities. And so I have been writing about that, and also writing about like what are some solutions to breaking out of spending many thousands of dollars on summer camp. So that's definitely like a current passion topic of mine. But I also really like writing about gender equity and partnerships in the home and sort of like how to think about gender roles, fatherhood, relationships, these sorts of things. That's another one of my passion topics.
Well, I'm gonna have to check out your newsletter because I don't think I'm yet a subscriber. So I will be
Ah,
I'll be a
one
new
subscriber coming
subscriber.
my way.
And I'll be heading your way very shortly. And those are really great topics. I mean, obviously very timely, the summer camps topic. And I know even if my kids are older, my friend group is much older, but I hear it about now their grandkids and others who these young parents are really struggling with the affordability of summer camps. I mean,
Yes.
costing more in many instances than what would traditionally daycare be and or what their education costs are throughout the year. So it shouldn't be
Yes.
cost prohibitive to keep kids healthily busy throughout a summer.
Yes. And sort of our norms around what's acceptable for kids to do and how they need to be supervised, like that has changed a lot in one generation, which is like a
Yeah.
new area that I'm interested in discussing because even in 30 years, what we think is acceptable for kids to do by themselves has changed a lot. So
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think
yeah.
that in my friend group, we often there's on social channels as well. You can see these like kids of the 80s threads and videos.
Yes.
It's like, wow, we stayed out till the lights came on in the neighborhood, and parents didn't
Right.
know where we were and weren't tracking our whereabouts through things like Life 360.
Yeah.
So it is a very different day to be a parent and caregiver, and lots of unique and new challenges that current generations of parents are facing.
Yep.
So we always like to close our conversations, to which this was a great one, and I really appreciate your time, Catherine, with sharing best pieces of advice. So throughout all of our lives, we're given lots of advice, and I would love for you to share what's that best piece of advice that you've been given that you would love to share with our audience.
So I want to give advice that is counter to the advice we talked about that we both received as young girls and women, which is my piece of advice is that you cannot have it all. Some people might like immediately chafe at hearing me say that. But I think the sooner you realize that you can't have it all, especially all the time, it's very freeing to realize that there's some things that are going to be going great and some things that are going to be going terrible. And maybe everything's going to be going terrible sometimes, but there's not some mythical place out there in the future where everything, if you just play your cards right, everything is going to be perfect. And I think as women, we're sold that and we swallow that and we think that if it's not perfect, it's our fault. So if you realize that you can't have it all and that you can just have 70% of things are going like basically okay, like that's great. It really resets your expectations. And I think it just makes us a lot happier. So that is my counterintuitive, probably controversial advice for today.
I don't think it all or it shouldn't be controversial, and I think great advice for our listeners to hear, regardless of what age or stage they are in life, because I think again, many of us throughout our childhood were kind of sold this bill of life is going to be great and idyllic and you can have it all. And I do think we can achieve a lot and get to maybe a place where we're experiencing many of those things we aspired to, but it's really difficult to have it all at once. And I think that's
Yes.
one of those pieces that's really difficult. And my kids always laugh because I achieve something and then it's like, okay, on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I also hope women take time to appreciate those things they have achieved and to kind of pause and not just be moving forward to that next task or that next goal or objective, because we women are dealt a lot throughout the course of a day and week. And it's, I think, setting those realistic expectations as you shared and people giving themselves that freedom to say, I don't need to be hitting 100% on every single thing that I'm trying to achieve or work towards. So great advice. I can't wait to be now a regular subscriber of the Double Shift and to be able to enjoy your insights more frequently. And again, very excited to have you as one of our keynotes at our Moms in Manufacturing Conference on June 13th. So thank you, Catherine, for your time. So nice to virtually meet you and hope to someday cross paths in real life.
Great. I'm looking forward to the conference.
Thank you for listening to Hear Her Story, a podcast produced by the Women in Manufacturing Association. Be sure to share, review, and subscribe to Hear Her Story on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen.